Horseshoe Bend was one of the only victories in a war that was turning out to be a disaster for the United States.
The British had captured Washington, D.C., following the Battle of Bladensburg, which military historians have called the worst disgrace in American military history, when the American militia broke and ran, hardly firing a shot. The British then moved in, burned the White House and the Capitol. So the war had been going very badly.
With Britain threatening to further humiliate America by conquering New Orleans, the Army was desperate to find a general who could get his men to stand and fight. The general finally chosen was incredibly tough on his men, and yet his men were fiercely loyal to him. A riddle explained by his nickname, Old Hickory.
Andrew Jackson became Old Hickory when he was coming back from the front down in Mississippi, and he decided that he would walk while the wounded rode. And so he walked all the way home. And his men loved him for it. It was an example of amazing spiritual leadership. And they started calling him Old Hickory because they thought he was as tough as a hickory stick.
Old Hickory had never had a day of formal military training in his life. And yet the Battle of New Orleans would be depicted in song, story, and art for the next 100 years. For Andrew Jackson and his men were about to shock the world. To even out the odds with the British, Jackson enlisted the aid of the French pirate Jean Lafitte, Choctaw Indians, and the free blacks of New Orleans. Then he massed them beside his men on a narrow stretch of ground between a swamp and the Mississippi River. On January 8, 1815, a huge wave of battle-hardened British troops swept down on Jackson's irregulars. Instead of turning and running, as the British had watched American troops do in numerous battles before, Jackson and his men marched into the pages of American history.
They really thought that once these professionals came marching towards these frontiersmen, they'd all run. And to their surprise, they not only didn't run, they stood and fired one volley after another right into the faces of these poor oncoming British soldiers and just mowed them down.
Jackson had proved that America could stand up to the world's greatest military power and win.
The victory that he won was almost unbelievable. The British lost hundreds of men dead on the battlefield. Jackson's casualties in the main battle were 8 killed and 13 wounded. It was astonishing. It's still astonishing.
As news of the victory spread across the country, America was swept up in a wave of patriotism unrivaled in its history.
I think the whole character of the American people changed after the War of 1812. Prior to that time, if you asked a person who or what they were, they would say, I'm a New Yorker, I'm a Virginian, I'm from Connecticut, I'm from Massachusetts. After New Orleans, they said, I am an American.
Americans' pride in the victory was stoked by a flood of images of the battle. For a new invention, aquatint engraving enabled artists to make multiple color copies of the same image much faster than ever before. A delighted American public bought up thousands of pictures of the glorious American victory at New Orleans. And at the center of many of these new engravings was the new American hero, Andrew Jackson.
Andrew Jackson was really one of the first national celebrities. Songs were written about him, clubs were founded for him. January 8th, the anniversary of the Battle of New Orleans, towns would have Jackson dinners and banquets. He was a cultural force before he was a political force.
The festivities were boisterous, for Americans had more than just the Battle of New Orleans to celebrate.
After 1815, the Americans were very much free to work out their own destiny without interference from Europe. This meant that they were enthused, excited, and they thought they could accomplish anything they wanted to. It also lent a sense of urgency. They believed that if they didn't get it right now, they might not get another chance, that this was the time, this was the place.